In this video, I'm going to review very briefly how to choose a topic effectively, and then I'll dig into 3 levels of analysis that we can do in a social science research or essay, namely micro level, meso level, and macro level analysis. And then we'll talk about some initial steps that we follow to build up a whole research project. And one of the initial steps for building an essay will be done in our assignment 1, and I'll explore the nitty-gritty details of assignment 1 that I'm going to give you very soon. I'll post assignment 1 on Moodle very soon. And then we'll talk about how to effectively find good, useful, relevant sources that will help you to build various micro, meso, and macro level aspects of your essay, especially in the macro level. And then we'll talk about some categorization of academic sources, and of course in that process we'll talk about what we mean by academic sources. So now let's review a little bit in terms of how to pick a social science issue or topic to write an essay on. First of all, we need to keep in mind that the social issue that we are thinking of is significant, by which we basically mean that this social problem or social issue is affecting or will potentially affect a large number of people in our society. So that's our very simple criteria, and we'll have to make sure that our social issue is academic in nature. And one criteria to fulfill this requirement is that we need to make sure that we are finding enough academic sources to build our arguments, ideas, and aspects in this essay. In that process, we'll have to make sure that an academic topic that we pick is not already overdone, especially in the mainstream media. And also we need to pick a topic that is not underdone, because if an academic topic is really underdone, that would mean that it will be really difficult for us to find useful academic sources. If nobody has done any research on a topic, then it will make our life difficult. So we'll try to strike a balance between something that is not overdone and something that is not too rare or underdone, and thereby we'll fine-tune on our topic. And the way you can fine-tune on your topic is by reading. First, pick a general topic that you're interested in, and then read textbook chapters that seem interesting to you. Try to find interesting documentaries or interviews or even TED Talks, etc. And they will give you very good ideas in terms of interesting topics. And then by using those interesting topics as keywords or ideas, you Google search and search the academic sources to figure out that striking point or a balanced topic that will be not too overdone, but at the same time relatively easier to find sources on. All right, so we'll also have to make sure that whatever we are doing research on adds significantly to our knowledge, your knowledge as an author, and also to a typical reader's knowledge. Because we want to write an essay that will not make the reader feel like they already knew this stuff. You need to dig a little deeper, especially some systemic causes and systemic or economy-wide possible remedies in terms of how we can change laws, rules, policies, or international cooperation to mitigate this social issue or social problem. Those kind of discussions can add to a reader's knowledge and your knowledge too. All right. So this fourth criteria you will try to fulfill, but I understand if you cannot, because some of you still don't have any plan about what programs you want to pursue, what careers you want to pursue, and that's perfectly fine. And therefore, if you don't know what you're going to do in the future, then this criteria is not going to be required. Now let's talk about 3 possible levels of analysis of any social issue that we see around us. One such possible label could be micro level, which basically analyzes individual level causes, consequences, and possible remedies of a social issue. For example, when we are looking at any social issues such as, let's say, child abuse, or say inequality, etc., we naturally think about what happens to a child, what happens to an individual's psychology when they are victims of abuses, or when they experience poverty or discrimination, etc. So those would be some individual level analysis. Meso level mostly talks about group level, or let's say small community level analysis. So for example, when somebody is thinking about child abuse or inequality, or let's say cyberbullying, then they can think of some of the causes and effects and possible remedies that can emerge at this meso level, right? So bullying has a lot of group psychology effects. Bullying can be sometimes prevented by a small community. For example, what kind of policies can a school design? What can the teachers do so that as a group or in a class or in a entire school, they can minimize the incidences of bullying? So that would be a meso level type of analysis. The most important level of analysis is macro level, because macro level means society as a whole. As a whole. So we know that the society as a whole is just a sum total of individuals and groups. But from the top down level of the society, we know that every society has a government. For example, Canada has a government, right? Government, and they make policies, rules, laws, programs that are going to target these social issues, to mitigate these social issues. And sometimes in our social system or system-wide phenomena, we can have some causes and consequences that are related to a social issue. All right. So, for example, if somebody is thinking of a social issue called wealth gap or inequality, we know that we live in a capitalistic society where lots of government policies encourage businesses and entrepreneurship, and they are rewarded heavily. Whereas, on the other hand, capitalistic societies follow more of a free market approach, where everybody should earn their livelihood and rewards depending on their contribution. But naturally, a large number of people are not able to contribute as much as talented entrepreneurs or engineers, etc. And therefore, those group of people will be disadvantaged and deprived of wealth. A society has its own education policy, and how a society is building its policies and laws to support education systems so that anybody who wants to pursue higher education can pursue it. That also determines what level of inequality a society will have, because we live in a very modern society where high skill technological knowledge are almost essential to find a secure job and livelihood. And people who are deprived of that training, education, and human capital development will always fall behind. So, to make opportunities and education accessible to as many people as possible, how can we redesign our society's education system, healthcare system, etc. Those will be discussions of macro level or system-wide level. So system-wide level. So through this example, you might have already guessed that when we write a social science essay, we are delving into how we can improve our whole society in its totality, and therefore macro level analysis and macro level arguments will be the most important type of arguments in your essay. All right, a quick recap of what we meant by micro level. We saw that micro level deals with individual level analysis, how an individual views, how we view an individual, how a human individual psychology is affected due to certain social phenomena or social forces, so on and so forth. And we saw that when it comes to meso level, group level, or small community level, we are dealing with how human beings interact with each other. A family could be an example of a meso unit, or somebody might also argue that a family could also be viewed as a micro unit, but as a small gated community, or a small college, or a school, or a say for example an administrative unit such as the police department could be viewed as a meso-level unit, and we have lots of relationship analysis that can be done at a meso-level. Lots of meso-level policies, programs can be discussed in a social science topic, so on and so forth. And lastly, we talked about the macro level, and this basically talks about the structural or system-wide forces, and these forces could include laws, it could include government programs, and the political system, or even belief system. In many parts of the world that are religious, people experience very different life experiences and lifetime challenges and difficulties based on what is their national religion and how the government is enforcing those belief system. Lots of societies are secular, lots of societies follow religious rules. So those could be examples of system-wide forces that cause that give rise to various social problems and issues, and being able to reform those systemic forces can enable us to improve the design of our society. And by design of a society, we simply mean a set of rules and laws and programs and implementation of those rules, laws, and programs that can actually, probably, hopefully, improve the lives of millions of people. So that's our macro level analysis of causes and possible remedies of any social issue. So now let's talk about how we are going to build up our research report or essay throughout this semester. So far we have been scrambling into finding a suitable topic for each student, and that's our first step. And I know that many of you have successfully found your topic, and I know that these are tentative because as you read more rabbit holes open up in a specific topic, and you will specialize in more and more subtopics later on, and maybe you will change your topic little by little to make your topic narrower from a broader generalized topic. And some of you are still struggling to find a suitable topic. For those of you guys who are struggling, you need to start reading, and after finding good sources, and in this process we will do one assignment, which is our assignment 1, which I will post really soon on Moodle, and this assignment will be due pretty soon, maybe within the next 7-8 days. And this assignment is part of building up an essay from scratch. So what do we do in assignment 1? In assignment 1, you'll find just 3 very useful topics for you, sources for you. And these 3 sources should be such that each of these sources gives you a lot of ideas, especially at the macro level, at the system-wide level of this social issue that talks about the system-wide causes and how possibly at macro level we can reform the system by changing some rules, laws, programs, etc. So being able to find these very useful 3 sources might be challenging, but if you try, definitely you'll be able to find at least some good sources. And right now, I'm not going to talk about what we'll do in second assignment, because second assignment is basically going to be a continuation of first assignment. And unlike first assignment where you find 3 articles, in second assignment you'll find additional 6 more academic sources or articles or book chapters. We'll talk about that later. Let's just dig into assignment 1's nitty-gritty details first. I shall walk you through assignment 1 in a separate video, and I'll call that video file by this name. Let's say video assignment 1 instruction. All right, but let me give you a heads up. In assignment 1, you will be required to find 3 sources for your essay, and one of those sources will be non-academic, and 2 sources will be academic. And out of these 2 sources, at least one should be 1 or 2 book chapters, right? Try to find an academic book. What we mean by academic book, I'll explain in later slides. But usually, the reason why I am asking you to find a relevant book is that book chapters, chapter by chapters, books usually dig deeper and wider into meso and macro level causes and macro level policy suggestions, etc. And this kind of macro level analysis are usually not found in academic articles. They are most often found only in academic books. And therefore, if you cannot find a relevant book in your topic, your life will be difficult and my life will be difficult later on to find out various sorts of macro level aspects such as macro level causes and solutions in your topic. Also notice that regardless of whether it's non-academic or academic source, when you find a source, all right, you should try to find a source that is investigative in nature and that talks about all those macro level, mostly macro level. Of course, they will also talk about some micro and meso level, but try to find a source that mostly investigates deeper into macro level causes and possible solutions of your social issue. If you find a small article that talks about a micro, meso, or even macro issue, but if that article is only about half a page, I am sure that is not going to help you. That is not going to help you build your arguments, dig deeper and wider into various aspects. And that's why it's important to find an investigative non-academic source and also investigative academic sources that dig into macro level analysis. So if you ask me what could be some of the examples of investigative non-academic sources, there are sometimes documentary movies and documentaries. There are sometimes investigative journal reports. Sometimes just a 20-minute TED talk digs deep into various macro aspects, system-wide aspects of a social problems cause and possible remedies. And sometimes some other journal articles do a good job. So if you have difficulty finding this kind of sources, keep looking, and if you are absolutely clueless, please talk to me about this. All right. Otherwise, if your source is not really useful, your summary will not be useful, and building up your essay will be ultimately really difficult, and those kind of situations will jeopardize your grade. So again, I will walk you through this assignment 1 in a separate video. That file will be called Video Assignment 1 Instructions. I know that many of you have found your topic, but keep an open mind, and depending on what kind of sources you find and what interests you relatively more versus less, keep on tweaking around your topic. Maybe narrow it down as much as you can, but don't narrow it down so much that then you don't find sources. Now let's see some example of what we mean by general topic and focus topic versus a narrowed down working title. You don't need to decide your working title really soon, but within the next 2 weeks or so, we'll try to fix your working title for your essay. All right. So what is a working title or a name of an essay? A working title is kind of a tentative title which you can still further develop and change by the end of the semester. But the title basically specifies what main questions you are going to ask and what are the main claims you are going to make in your essay, right? So for example, when we think of a general topic, let's say somebody is interested in researching on eating disorders. But this is a very general idea, and if you cannot specify in terms of what exact questions you are going to ask, investigate in your essay regarding eating disorder, it will not be appealing to the reader. So an example of a specific question or a specific claim that the essay will try to make can be this: an analysis of psychological, economic, and sociological factors contributing to anorexia nervosa in North America. So in this statement, they have specified that they will mostly investigate into sociological and economic system-wide factors that can affect individuals and make them victim of this particular type of eating disorder called anorexia nervosa, and in a particular geographic area. So this is much more specific. This is an example of a specific topic or narrowed down or working title for a paper. And this title is still not finalized. You will be able to tweak around and improve this title over the semester. Another example: suppose somebody wants to write a research on sport because they are into sports. All right, that's way too general. A better example of working title could be violence in sports, because now you are going to specialize in what are the elements of violence in sports and how does violence in sports can affect people's psychology and their mental development. Maybe there are some positives and some negatives in violence in sports, and if we see some negatives as a society, what kind of policies we can impose to improve these sports such that they have less violence. Okay, so one example of an even better specific working title could be an analysis of the effect of violence in team sports on young children. Very specific. Their research is now targeted towards young children and only team sports, and they are going to analyze this from a psychological and sociological perspective. And sociological perspective means they will do some macro analysis too. Another example: suppose somebody is interested in slavery. Way too general. What are they trying to know or research on in slavery? A better example, say modern day slavery. Okay, modern day slavery sounds good. and that might be a little bit surprising to lots of readers, that modern day do we still have slavery. And then they can make an even better statement by specifically telling what kind of slavery we have in modern day, and what kind of systems are giving rise to macro factors are giving rise to this modern day slavery, and how we can remedy this worldwide problem. So here's an example: an economic and historical causes of modern day slavery in India, right? And somebody could go even farther. These slaveries can occur in many forms, sometimes in domestic services, sometimes in sexual services, so on and so forth. Whenever we do any kind of research, be it sociological, be it physical, medical, we must keep a neutral mind. We must be ready to criticize our own logic, and we must be open to criticism from our peers, because without criticism, there is no finding truth. Without criticism, we can never be sure that whatever we are claiming is true or not. In other words, without criticism and without neutrality, it is impossible to distinguish truth from false. One of the very common fallacy or mistake or dishonesty that sometimes researchers carry out is they cherry pick their evidence to support whatever they want to claim. And whatever we claim, we cannot believe it with 100% guarantee. And to have a scientific and neutral mind, we will always need to question our finding and get our findings checked and rechecked by our critics, and especially critics that don't really like us or are not related to us. All right, so that's how the scientific community works, and scientific consensus means that whatever one scientist claims is not believed to be true. Whenever one scientist makes a claim, dozens and dozens of other scientists check and examine the first scientist's claim against data, experiment, evidence, etc. And if nobody can refute the first scientist's claim, only then the claim can become a scientific consensus. So in our arguments, we will never cherry pick our evidence to support whatever we want to claim. We will claim based on our evidence and logic and theories. All right. So in many occasions historically, this kind of dishonesty is occurred and is still prevalent in certain communities, and we should never do it. We should never tell a researcher that here's the conclusion that you'll have to prove, and now go find facts according to that conclusion. That would be an insult to the whole discipline of science. All right. So an appropriate approach or a scientific approach to do research is whatever facts we are finding, based on those facts, evidence, based on those arguments, now what we can conclude or not conclude, that is the question we should answer. Now let's talk about which sources we can categorize as academic versus which are non-academic. In general, academic sources can be categorized as sources that went through scientific checks and balances. Sources or claims that always cite whenever they make a claim, where they found that information from. So those are the general characteristics of academic sources. For our practical purposes, if you ask me what are the academic articles, for example, academic articles, these are reviewed journal publications. What do we mean by publications? What do we mean by peer-reviewed? Well, academic journals never publish a paper unless the paper is being double-checked, i.e. reviewed by some blindfolded peers. Some experts, academicians in the field are given this particular article to check for any errors, mistake, etc. before the article is published in these journals. So that's our idea of peer-reviewed journal. In our library webpage, whenever you look for articles, you will always see that there's a checkbox that you can mark, and the checkbox will be called peer-reviewed. And if you do so, you are not going to have to worry about whether this journal is academic or not, peer-reviewed. Okay, academic books. What are these? Academic books are published usually by academic publishers, and sometimes we will not be able to distinguish between which publisher is academic or not. But the other criteria of any academic books is they always use systematic citations, which means whenever they claim a number or strong claim, they always, in parentheses, tell you where exactly they found this information from. All right. So in a book where you see that they are always claiming whatever they, citing whatever they're claiming, they're always citing whenever they are trying to give us any statistics or numbers or a theory, etc. Those books will have an academic status, all right? And they also have a systematic bibliography. All right. So now if you ask me what are non-academic books, these are non-academic books will not cite their information, not cite their strong claims. All right. And examples could be novels. In lots of times people will write a book about social issue, but you will not find citations. They cannot be used in our essay because they are not academic. So now let's see some categorization within these academic sources, various kind of sources, even though we will mostly use academic journals and academic books. So academic sources have three types of categorization: primary sources, secondary sources, and tertiary sources. Primary sources are any information that are collected through systematic survey. Say you surveyed 1,000 people, giving them some questions, or you interviewed a university professor to know their opinions. That could also be an example of an academic source, primary source. On the other hand, secondary sources are sources that use some primary source, such as data, such as interview, and analyze them to find some conclusions. And they got published in academic publications. They would be some example of secondary sources. Tertiary sources are based on secondary sources, some kind of summary, sometimes kind of information compilation. These are given in tertiary sources. In many occasions, tertiary sources are not really treated as academic sources. They are just treated as summaries, right? So here is some examples of what we mean by primary sources: qualitative and quantitative original data from interviews, from recordings, from survey data, so on and so forth. Pictures and photos, diaries, letters, all those things are primary sources, all right? And again, I need to be more specific here. Primary sources don't have much academic or non-academic status. Statistics published by say primary data collectors. Sometimes they are treated as academic sources, but photos, diaries, etc., they are neither academic nor academic. They're just primary sources because they are true. All right, we don't even have to give them any status. Secondary sources. Secondary sources are written by academics that discuss, explain, interpret, and analyze primary data. All right, based on the analysis of primary data, they make some claims, find some results, and those are secondary sources. So academic books and academic journal articles, they are all examples of secondary sources. And the distinction between academic versus non-academic book is academic books are written by people who have academic backgrounds, such as university professors, government researchers, independent organizations, researchers, etc., that have academic background. They are usually peer-reviewed and edited, all right? And they use only primary and secondary sources as evidence, and every time they make a claim or claim that they found something from a source, they always cite those sources. At the end of the books, they always have a systematically listed bibliography. All the sources they used are listed in that bibliography. And by the way, if you find a good academic book or a good academic article, you can find dozens of other related articles just by looking at that article or that book's bibliography section. So that's a very good way to find multiple sources once you find one good source. All right, and goals of these academic books and articles both is to advance knowledge mostly. And academic journals, on the other hand, were also peer-reviewed articles, but one distinction between an article and a book is an article digs into a very narrow subtopic in a particular social issue, and therefore for our course, in many occasions you'll find that articles are not going to help you much. Sometimes you'll get lucky, some articles will keep themselves on a broader issue and deal with one or two macro level aspects, but in many occasions you'll see articles are going to target such narrow subtopic that it might not be very relevant or helpful for you. Just trying to give you a warning about articles. All right, articles also use primary and secondary sources as their sources. They always cite, and for example, when you write an essay, you will always cite the sources and create a systematic bibliography. And the goals of these academic articles are also mostly to advance the human knowledge about a social issue or a problem, so on and so forth. Now, there is this other kind of source called tertiary sources. What are they? Tertiary sources use the secondary sources and then summarize ideas from those secondary sources. So, one example of a tertiary source is encyclopedia. It just collects information from various academic sources and maybe gives you a list of definitions, so on and so forth. All right. Textbooks that we use are also tertiary sources. They are most often not counted as academic sources because they did not use primary and secondary data. They used other secondary sources to write some kind of a summary of what was main findings or main definitions of ideas, so on and so forth. All right, so a quick recap. Just because our goal in this course is to use at least 8 academic sources, so if we ask ourselves, so how would I make sure that I found 8 academic sources? Just ask yourself these few questions. Does this article or source get published in an academic journal? Is it peer reviewed? That's it. Then you know that this source is an academic source. Just for your knowledge, a little more in-depth idea of what academic sources are. They contain original research project, not just descriptive facts. They always use systematic citation and bibliography, all right, and in-text citations too. and they are peer-reviewed and edited. Peer-reviewed and edited. And when we dig into academic sources, we'll try to make sure that our academic source is not too old, because what was found to be true, say, in the 1970s might have been refuted by now, because the scientific community might have found out that old knowledge is not has a lot of flaws. So we by 2020 we have changed our theory, we have changed our claims. So try to make sure that your sources are relatively new, and try to make sure that the publisher is an academic publisher. And sometimes this will be impossible, and I will not be very hard and fast in enforcing that you always make sure that the publishing house is academic. It's not a requirement for our course. Okay, so to look for academic sources, maybe the easiest way for you to start from is our Champlain College's library webpage. All you need to do is just go to your browser and type in champlainonline.com, and in that side you'll see the logo of our George Wallace Library. Click on that logo and it will take you to our library search engine. In the search engine page, you'll see tabs to look for articles, or to look for books, or to look for e-books, which means electronic books. And if you click on any of those tabs, accordingly, you can then start keyword searching, and then advanced keyword searching to find out books or articles that relate to your topic by your chosen keywords. The other types of sources you could try to dig into are listed here. For example, McGill Library, Concordia University Library, University of Montreal Library, and then if you just Google search BANQ, which is Quebec's biggest public library, BANQ. And on BANQ, you can make an account very easily just by filling out their information form. You can get into these later on, but for now, try to find sources from our library webpage. And also for non-academic source that you have to use in assignment 1, you can start from Google, Wikipedia, or any other web sources or physical sources of your choice, but try to find an article that investigates into mostly macro level causes and possible remedies in your topic, and you should be fine in that way.